thank you to NERC and SSPP for having us here today. I'm Maria Piacentini from Lancaster University, and I'm one of the principal investigators in our project. Alison Stowell is my other colleague who unfortunately is ill today. She's really disappointed she can't be here because she's been part of so many of the conversations obviously along the way. I also have a couple of colleagues from Lancaster here, Linda Henry and Lenka, who are here with me today. So when we started this project, when we started thinking about it, we are in a management school, and I myself come from a consumer behaviour perspective, and Alison comes from waste studies. And we were very much thinking about the problem of plastic in terms of the attitude behaviour gap. That was how we were kind of thinking about it to start with. And and it's that classic, this disconnect between what people say and what people do. So we put together this project, and our sort of approach was to try and take a holistic perspective on the attitude behaviour gap by saying, well, let's look at consumers, let's look at households, residents, etc. But also it's really important to get this whole supply chain perspective to include retailers, producers, to include waste management organisations. So we really wanted that to get the whole sense of what's going on here. And so to that end, our project team is a social science team, but we're still interdisciplinary within that. And a lot of times people can't get their head around management, what there's interdisciplinary within that, but there is. And there's some of us who are consumer experts, some who are supply chain retailer experts, some waste, etc. And when we were thinking, so we started first of all thinking about plastic, and then through conversations, this is just what we're going to cover today, but through conversations with various industry connections that we had, we started to focus our thinking on food plastic packaging. So that was where we settled. And this is a very industry-facing project in the sense that we had 11 partners with us, some national level organisations, Waitrose, Suez, big international organisations, the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. So you'd sort of industrial professional networks with waste management organisations, with local city council as well, with smaller producers, with IM3 involved. So, and also reuse organisations. So we had a number of organisations who were all really interested and have been with us in the whole journey. And I think that's really important because we've done all the investigative work, and then in the end we've managed to actually act on some of the findings and start to develop smaller projects subsequently with our partners. So this is our team. This is the academics along the top, and then we have a team, just as with the previous project. It's a large team with many researchers, etc., working on it. So our overarching aim is to be trying to gain these holistic insights to enable policy and industry to try and bridge, rethink this attitude behaviour gap. And to do that, we started with a very holistic mapping exercise, trying to understand what we know, the sort of socio-cultural context, historical industrial factors. Then we had a significant household stage of the project where we were looking at how people are using plastic packaging. We went shopping with people, we did ethnographies with households. So really trying to get a sense of the lived experience of the role of plastic in people's lives. We've also worked closely with supply chain actors. We've done some case study work with a cheese producer and a farm, trying to understand what role plastic serves there in terms of producing goods that are then fit for purpose, etc., and what the issues are. The post-consumer plastic pathways is the waste management side, where we've worked closely with local authorities in 2 areas to try and really follow the progress of plastic through, once it leaves the household, what then happens. And using this to try and develop a set of holistic ideas that we've then fed into 2 smaller projects that I'll hopefully get time to talk to you about today. So what I'm really going to do today is I'm not going to go into the specifics of each project, but rather try and tease out some of our cross-cutting themes, because it's quite interesting the things that cropped up, but the different flavour of them at the different parts of the project. So this next slide just really summarises our approach, which I've kind of gone into, but we've got the literature review, the consumer study, supply chain project, waste management and the pilot projects. And overall, we've had like over 90 organisations working with us on this project. So there's a lot of people we've interacted with, and about 550 individuals, whether it be households or consumers. So the cross-cutting themes I'm going to speak, I'm not going to go into too much depth on, and some of them don't look too surprising, but what's interesting is how they appear and crop up differently across the study. So the first theme that it's been there all along, this idea of the moralities and paradoxes of plastic and the complexity of the role of plastic in people's lives, how it's played out, the moral debates, how it's amplified through the media, the different stories. And it was a very big theme early on in our work, but it continued to prevail right through to our very, very last data collection that was happening just before Christmas. So it doesn't go anywhere. It's a really interesting thing that we've found throughout the project is that whenever we talk about plastic to whoever we're talking to, in whatever capacity, whether it be a professional organisation capacity, people still revert to their personal story and interactions with plastic packaging. So it's highly emotive territory. One of the things about it is, we can all understand, the debates that we see in the media. What's interesting is one of the things that's cropped up and we've kind of built on is in consumer households, there's a real tension between the sort of imperative to think about food waste and how food waste is contained, or their interactions with that idea set against the idea of reducing plastic. And that's a real tension for households and something we've picked up in our reporting. Through the supply chain work, we really picked up on this idea of, alternative materials have environmental costs associated with them in terms of heavier packaging, being more expensive to transport, etc. So there's nothing is neutral in this territory, as we know. And this overemphasis on plastic that's net zero, not net zero's targets, in terms of this, the waste management side really picked up that we're not really emphasising enough, or consumers aren't thinking enough about reuse and reduction as opposed to the recycling side. So really, this lack of the complexity, the morality issue, the paradoxes all lead us to this sort of shifting responsibility issue, and it's hard to pin down who's responsible for devising solutions here, but really this collective action is vitally important. And the next slide, one of the themes that came up pretty strongly and fed into our final stage pilot projects was this idea of how people are identifying and it's kind of picked up a little bit in the previous project. How do people know what to do and what are they using? And identification as a tacit and experiential activity was a really strong theme. People relying on touch and feel. Well, this feels crinkly, so therefore, and making decisions about what they're going to do in their household and their infrastructure based on feel and how they distinguish materials from that point of view. And this reliance on what they know. Now, whether what they know is right or not is not saying it's irrelevant, but people build these pictures and frames of reference that therefore influence what they then do. And we found that not just among consumers, we found it in the employee information as well. We found it, when we looked at the supply chains, when we went and talked to workers, they were too relying on tacit and experiential activity, thinking about what to do with plastic. So it's an important point in terms of thinking about how you're designing packaging that's visually and tactilely recognisable as recyclable. Convenience. Now, we all know about the importance of convenience for consumers want convenient products, and with the increased material functionality of plastics goes with that increased expectations and reliance on plastics for convenience. It's embedded in consumers' life, and it's really, really difficult to shift that. And the households that we met, there were some really, really active recyclers and really committed to plastic reduction people there. But they talked often about the difficulties of taking packaging back to supermarkets, trying to use their own tubs for meat, etc. So there are real issues around that, and supplier-led innovations may lead to inconvenience for consumers. And this was something that came up quite a lot in terms of materials that might have had components that were recyclable. Consumers had another job of work to do to try and work out what they're going to do with it. And through our waste management project, or part of things, we really picked up on this issue of the amount of labour that goes on by waste management organisations, bin men, lorry drivers, the drivers, etc., to make things as comfortable and enable as much convenience as possible for households. So it is complex, and it came across the whole value chain. And linked into that was the idea about contamination. This drive, people want convenience, and if they're making errors, if you like, everything's so connected that if they're not doing as needed, then we end up with contaminated recycling chains. So the household is often uneasy with contamination in the household. So in every household we went with some lovely pictures of household infrastructures around recycling, the informal structures that people have. But people were uneasy with, dirty materials hanging about, so therefore washing materials is important, packaging, etc. But then what goes with that is up factor of they don't want contamination. This is how it's narrated to us, how consumers are thinking about it, the barriers to them washing out and ensuring that there's not contamination in their waste stream. So household sorting, washing and squashing practices came up as a really important issue. And I'm going to pick up on it again in a minute, but when we spoke about this with our partners, we would get various responses. Some of our partners, probably like many people in here, would go, yeah, we know that already. Yeah, we know that, right? Other partners were like, well, we kind of know that, but we kind of don't, because we know that there's an issue with sort, wash and squash, but we don't really know what's behind it. So that triggered to us the need to think about further projects and work in that area. And the whole issue of contamination was a massive issue in the waste management work stream, because people working at bin collection are at the interface of that. They are picking up these boxes that have got contamination, and they've got to do additional sorting, etc., including dealing with bin juice, and just the mess of it all is not appealing or nice for them either. So it came right across from packaging designers. There's stories of contamination in every single part of our project, and it is an important theme for us that we picked up in the final project activities. And then the final theme that we're working up and really thinking a lot about is, what do we call it? Extending from private to public practices, amplification. There's a disconnect. There's something that happens in private. People, I've already alluded to, people devise their own systems at home that work for them to allow them to work with the system they're in. But then they leave the home and they're workers, or they're out enjoying themselves, they're out socialising, etc. And how do they extend that private practice into the public domain? And it is a real issue. And in our household research, we've picked up a lot about people working in, now it was at the height of COVID, but there was a lot of emergency workers, and we're talking about their use of plastics in their working life and the contrast and disconnect with their private home life, etc. So this idea of the detachment of household and workplace practices is an issue, and especially too when people are working in areas that are not necessarily the same local authority that they live in, so they've got to deal with changing. So, this idea of uniformity, simplification, standardisation would make things a lot easier, wouldn't it? But that is definitely a challenge that's faced. So from those themes, we then finished up our project working closely with two of our partners, one of the local authorities and one was one of the retailers. And we'd talked to them about the key themes and said, is there anything in here that you like the sound of that you'd like us to do a bit more with? So the local authority was Lancaster City Council. They, at that time, were changing bin collection from fortnightly to monthly, right? So here's something that's happening in a local area. It's going to have a massive impact, because that affects what happens in households then, right? Because, right, I've got to now store up my stuff, and it's got to be really clean, because it's going to be lingering for the 4 weeks, etc., or wherever it goes. So they asked us, and they really wanted to dig deep. And the other really interesting thing is how connected these local authority bin workers were with the community. When we spoke to them, I'm sure it was some breach of data, they were telling us in households, they could tell us what people were doing, they could tell us a lot, right? Obviously, we didn't use that information. But what it showed us was, here is a route for influence. This close proximity of these workers into neighbourhoods They see themselves as having a very strong educative role in, hey, what's going on? Why is this, So we worked with them. Lenka, who's here, helped with the door-to-door. We did a lot of communications. We did a lot of community engagement work. Community engagement work is supremely difficult to do, right? When we hear a lot in social sciences, okay, in social sciences, we talk a lot about going in and engaging with communities. It's very difficult. How do you get people to come to you? And we tried multiple things. We ended up, after a number of events, we went and did door-to-door work, and we did a very, very brief survey. And the narratives that were coming up, there was 3 kind of main narratives. People were washing and squashing, just doing it more frequently. Number 1, fine. People were doing it, but they weren't really sure what they were doing. They were just doing what they thought they should do, and they weren't sure about the effectiveness. And then there was this third narrative of people who are going, well, I'm not bothering with that anymore because I can't. The new system of the once a month won't accommodate my waste. So I'm just not, it's not going to help me manage my recyclables. So here was us digging deeper. Even in this short survey, we were able to dig a bit deeper and then share back with Lancaster City Council, look, we really need to think about communications here and support, etc. Our second, and I'm just going to go into this very quickly, our second project that we did was, when I talked about the tactile, one of the things was, how do people know? How are people making their judgments? So we through various partners, we were given some samples of materials which had varying levels of recyclate content. And what we really wanted to look into was, does the recyclate content and recyclability of the material matter for people? And so we set up now, it was, let's all be honest here, it was a brief in-store survey. We're not trying to say this was a big scientifically, it was designed well, but if we did more time, it probably would have been a bit more robust. But we wanted to go in and to speak to consumers and say, what do you think? Tell us what these materials are. How do you feel about them? Would you engage? Would you buy products in this material? And overwhelmingly, the response was, from these people, was they don't mind, and in fact prefer the recycled content material. That wasn't an issue. And that was against what all our retailers had said. They'd all said, consumers don't want material that looks imperfect. They don't want packaging that looks imperfect. Our response was that wasn't the case. The dominant questions that people had were about environmental concerns and narratives about health risks, thinking about, health, appearance, environment were all interwoven for them. But the long-term environmental concerns were dominant for consumers in relation to packaging. Now, obviously, this is something that needs to be explored further. So we have a whole load of recommendations across our reports, and they're detailed and going into a lot of detail. And there's different ways that we can think about this. We've thought about it in terms of what would be a sort of holistic communication campaigns, operating at a sort of whole system level, thinking of misconceptions, thinking about how solutions work, helping consumers understand what happens to the plastic packaging once they're done with it, what next, So you can imagine a whole load of interesting and valuable communications. Thinking about, in everything we did, the focus coming from consumers was about recycling. Less on consumers and residents' minds was less the reuse and reduction. That was not really the focus from them. They were focused on recycling. And that tells us something about how we talk about these things from a sort of policy point of view. And I think the other thing, I was talking about it with Linda earlier over lunch, was collaboration. So what we've had is we've had a really fantastic set of partners who've been there with us from the start, and 11 of them. And what has really been clear is we're actually well placed as a team. We've built up trusting relationships with these people who wouldn't necessarily connect from these different parts of the supply chain. And we think this collaboration is really important, and we're well placed for it. So just my last couple of slides, just in terms of what we've done. Well, we've done lots, papers, industry reports, etc. We're very proud in particular of our non-traditional routes to engaging consumers. We've commissioned a cartoon about the moral subordination of plastic waste relative to food waste. I'm not able to show it yet because it's not public yet, but when you do it, it's fun. We've put a little book together aimed at lay audiences about trying to talk about plastic in different ways to influence change. So my very last slide is just really what next. And I know Linda's going to be joining the panels tomorrow, maybe talk about it a bit more, but these are the kind of things that really come up in our work, thinking about the material, who does it matter to, what does convenience actually mean? What about alternative food packagings? What do we really know about them and what do they mean for people? Thinking about household relationships with bins and containers, I think is important, simplification, etc. So I know I've just whizzed through those last slides and I can take questions, of course, but thank you everybody for listening. It's been a really fantastic project to be part of. The whole scheme's been great, but as a project, we've really had a great time, haven't we? And we've really enjoyed working with our partners, so we're really grateful for that. Thank you.